For those of you that don't know me, I'm Felice Apolinsky. I'm the program director here at Gilda's Club, and we are incredibly lucky to have Dr. James Gray speak to us today about proton therapy so that we all learn kind of what this exciting treatment is and how it works and who it's accessible to and what treatment what diagnoses it serves best. So Dr. Gray has been on our Gilda's Club Medical Resource Council for probably the entire 20 years that we've been open. He was somebody I went after early, and he said yes, and has stayed on our Medical Resource Council. So he helps to make sure that his patients and families know what we do and who we are, and that we're free to support them as well. So we just opened here in Franklin in May. So this is our second location. We're down on Division Street for our main location, and then we're here. We've been here about 7-8 months. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jim Gray.
Thank you. Hold your applause. Just don't know yet. Anyway, thank you very much for coming and visiting with us as a guest both of Gilda's Club and of the Provision Care's Proton Therapy Center. So my job today is just try to give you an overview and then see what kind of questions I raise about what is proton therapy. A lot of people are really in the dark about what this is, what it represents. And so probably my biggest job over the next couple of years, other than trying to develop our physician contacts, is just let the community know what is this, why is it here, why isn't it here before? This is a very advanced medical community. Nashville, right? I mean, we have all these big medical names and so forth. Why are we just now getting proton therapy when it's been around for 30 years? Yeah, that's a good question. So, first off, proton therapy is a form of radiation therapy. So my job, I'm not specifically a proton doctor. I am a board-certified radiation oncologist, which means I use radiation to treat cancer patients. And that's my job. I'm board certified to do that with a lot of different techniques, though. Proton therapy is one of those techniques. But what a lot of people don't realize, my specialty has actually been around, in essence, for 100 years. People think, wow, radiation treatment's got to be pretty new. Going back to using radium and cesium implants, of using radiation energy, it's amazing how long radiation therapy has actually been around. Over 100 years. We've been around a lot longer than chemotherapy has been. We've been around longer than most modern, any type of surgery. So it's not a new idea to use radiation to treat tumors. So radiation oncologists, like me, we're medical doctors. We have to go to medical school. No shortcuts on that. So we're trained to use radiation to eradicate cancer. So it's the classical training of, typically in this country, 4 years of an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree, 4 years of medical school type training, and then postgraduate training in terms of internship and residency. So for radiation oncology, that entails 5 years after medical school. So after high school, you're talking about, it's a long time. It's, what does that add up to, 13 years? So, but to me, easily worth it. Maybe to some people, not so much. And the other point is that among all cancer patients, about 2/3 of cancer patients will receive radiation therapy as part of their treatment. That comes as a surprise to a lot of people as well. This is actually pretty commonly used for a patient during their lifetime of their cancer. Now, history of radiation therapy, again, not specifically proton therapy, but radiation therapy, going all the way back to 1895. This is not the last century, but the century before that. Hello, long time ago. That was actually when the first discovery of X-rays was made, and the first patient, just a year later, was treated with using these X-rays. And then we began to develop more. We developed what we call high-energy photons, which allowed us to penetrate into deeper tumors. And then we have head and neck cancers, which were first treated with a series of radiation treatments. Note the year, 1928, 90 years ago, 91 actually. A cyclotron now we'll come to with this, specifically is with proton therapy, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. That was built first in 1932. Actually, the initial invention of that by E.O. Lawrence was actually 3 years before that, 1929. What you're hearing from me is this technology is not as brand new as a lot of people think it is. These ideas have been around for a long, long time. The first patients treated with neutron beams was done in 1938. This hasn't panned out as well, but it was an idea that we tried to do. But again, it goes back many, many years, 80 years. And then more technology, we began to develop ways of delivering radiation more efficiently into deeper parts of the body. Now, in 1954, proton beam finally came along as a treatment actually delivered for a patient. 1954 is how long proton therapy has actually been on the scene. Now, just minimally, we only can do a very limited type of treatment into the brain with a particular type of research, cyclotron or proton accelerator. But it goes back that far. And now we've had, of course, a series of technological advances, from the advances in physics and the world of engineering, to make this actually work better. So how does radiation therapy work? This is not like a Star Trek phaser gun. You aim it at the bad guy and it makes it burn up and go away. Radiation therapy specifically works by damaging the DNA, the information system of a cell that tells it how to reproduce another cell, and also how it tells what that cell is supposed to do in our body. And then, as you know, every one of our cells contains our entire DNA. But what's critical is that DNA has to be replicated intact to create another cell. One cell becomes two cells. The DNA has to be split apart, and I don't know how much background everybody has in biology and the study of that, but it's basically a double strand. You have to separate the strands, you have to replicate the strands, and then pull them apart, and that's called mitosis, and that's actually where a cell becomes two cells. And they're virtually identical. They are truly clones, okay? The second cell has the exact DNA signature of the first cell. Now, when a cell does that dividing, if we damage the DNA, our body has been instructed. And this occurs through evolution or creation, or however you choose to believe and look at that. But our bodies are set up that if a cell does not perfectly replicate itself, it will sacrifice itself. You cannot have imperfect copies moving forward, or they will cause damage to the entire organism because those cells aren't doing the right thing. So you have one cell, you make it into two cells. If these two cells aren't perfect duplicates of that first cell, this cell is told to absolutely self-destruct in the process of dividing into two cells. So that happens, believe it or not, billions of times in your body every day, because we have gazillions of cells in our body, and we're going through this replication process. And so cells will sometimes imperfectly divide. And if they do, so if you've got 1 million gut cells between here and here in your colon, you can sacrifice a few dozen or even a few thousand because they didn't perfectly reproduce, because the others will make up for the difference, right? That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So what we do is accelerate the damage. And when these damaged cancer cells, when they try to replicate, and we're doing this specifically to cancer cells, although it happens to healthy cells as well. But that's how radiation creates its changes. That's how a cell might be promoted, because we actually use radiation energy to create one of those types of mutations or pieces of damage in that DNA. And then that causes the cell to die, usually only when it tries to divide. So it doesn't die right away. It's a delayed death, like in the old movies, the guys running around and saying, you got me, he doesn't die for about 5 minutes of acting. But in reality, he's already been mortally wounded. And so if you mortally wound a cancer cell, that cancer cell will die at the time it tries to replicate, typically. Okay? There are exceptions to just about every rule we can give you. But so it destroys their ability to reproduce. When the cell dies, the body just naturally eliminates them. They become constituent pieces of our body: amino acids, polypeptides, polysaccharides, different types of fatty acids, and I mean, all the different things that make up any other cell. Our body's just we are perfect recycling machines. And we just break all that down from a cancer cell, because if the cancer cell's not intact and able to divide into 2 cells, and then 4 cells, and then 8 cells, and then ad infinitum, that's what makes a cancer dangerous. If it can't do all that, its constituent pieces, parts, are the same thing as the rest of us. So the body just recycles it. Now, there are times in radiation therapy, and that damage process is the only thing we need to do. But other times, we combine it with surgery or chemotherapy. So, describing radiation therapy, radiation oncologist like me is a medical doctor who oversees the radiation therapy treatment. So I have to decide if radiation is the right thing to do, then decide how we would do that radiation, how you would combine it with other therapies, usually in conjunction with other physicians. So that's a collaborative, multidisciplinary type discussion. And then I have to work with physics staff, dosimetry staff, a lot of very highly trained co-professionals here that help me decide, okay, how are we going to apply this radiation best? Because there are a lot of different ways of doing it. Proton beam is just one of them. And so some of these people include the medical radiation physicists. These are very highly trained scientists in the study of physics, and they almost always have a minimum of a master's degree, and many of them actually have PhDs in physics. A dosimetrist, again, a pretty highly trained person who works with the physicist and does a lot of the specific calculation routines on a particular patient. And then the radiation therapists are further well-trained people who actually operate the machinery to deliver the treatment on a daily basis, because a typical radiation treatment doesn't take just one treatment. There are some, but usually it's a minimum of 3 to 5 treatments, and more commonly 20 to 40 individual treatments. So every one of those treatments where a patient has to receive that, it's actually done by the radiation therapist. Set the patient up, make sure the patient's aligned correctly, make sure they're on target correctly, turn the beam on, monitor all that, make sure the patient's doing okay. So they are clinically oriented people who have a science background and are able to operate the equipment. They're not supposed to make a decision about, oh, I don't think we should treat this patient again today. That decision falls back to me. And then a radiation oncology nurse. This is a clinic. This is a facility where I have to assess people in a medical setting, and nurses are a critical component of that. I have both registered nurses, RNs, and we also have nurse practitioners here who have an advanced degree and are kind of in the bridge gap between what a physician can do for a patient and what a nurse can do for a patient. So there are a couple of major ways of delivering radiation, but the biggest division you can talk about is external radiation therapy versus internal radiation therapy. And external radiation therapy is what all of proton therapy is, okay? And it delivers a beam using a linear accelerator or gantry. These machines beam radiation at the tumor in the patient, but from the outside. But the alternative is actually put small radioactive sources inside the body. They're tiny little seeds or sources of radiation, so it gives you radiation from the inside out, so to speak. And that's done with a technique called brachytherapy, which is actually, that's a Latin term for short. So it specifically means short-range therapy. People also call them seed implants. The most common one is in prostate cancer. But we do it in a variety of different things. We do it in breast cancer. We do it in lung cancer sometimes. We've done it in, believe it or not, eye tumors. So there's a lot of different situations where we may put radioactive sources right next to where the tumor is. The type will depend upon the location, size, and type of the cancer. And so that's what I'm supposed to be smart enough to be able to figure out. Should we use external beam? Should we use an implant? Actually, I use both in some circumstances. So that's what our training teaches us to know how to do. Of the external radiation approaches, what used to be our standard, but is now quickly becoming this, but formerly something called three-dimensional conformal radiation therapy. And this means we will use three-dimensional space with computers that allow us to calculate how the beams interact with our tissues, but do that not just like one little slice of a CT scan of a patient at a time, but taking into consideration you're doing this to a three-dimensional entity, a three-dimensional patient. But the advancement beyond that is called intensity modulated radiation therapy, which is today's basic standard. And the radiation is broken into a lot of little beamlets when it's aimed, and we have so much computing power now with the very powerful computing systems that we have that we can calculate how, instead of aiming like 4 or 8 beams of radiation from different angles, in essence we're calculating for thousands of little individual beams going at the patient in order to deliver the radiation where we want it. You want to hit the tumor and not give significant radiation dose to other structures nearby. Now remember that point, because that's what we're going to come back to with proton therapy. Neutron beam therapy, very rare, uses a different type of subatomic element called a neutron, but it deserves mention, but unfortunately it's about all it gets in these days. Stereotactic radiotherapy is a technique where this is a form, basically, of a combination kind of beams, where you're delivering a lot of different beams to a very small target, typically, with a very specific aiming technique. But it's really kind of just these guys on steroids, in a manner of speaking. But proton beam therapy is a real different animal, because all of these, well, I'm sorry, neutron beam does not, but stereotactic radiotherapy, IMRT, three-dimensional conformal radiation therapy, all of brachytherapy uses X-rays of a sort, or something, what we call photons. pure energy packets, okay? Light energy that's at such a powerful type of penetrance, our eyes don't see it. That's X-rays, it's just like visible light, but it's of a different spectrum, we can't see it with our eyes. And it also, because of its higher energy, it penetrates more deeply and carries more energy when it goes in, so it can cause changes in our cells. Light energy hitting our skin doesn't cause a lot of change, although you're probably aware of a sunburn, which is actually not the visible light doing that, it's the ultraviolet light causing damage to our skin. So that's a form of a radiation-induced injury, but it's very superficial because it won't penetrate. Now, regular radiation energy, though, is light energy, X-rays, pure electromagnetic radiation. The difference with proton beam therapy is actually it's little particles, almost think of them as tiny, tiny round bullets, in a manner of speaking, that are going into our bodies. And it has a different way of being absorbed when they come into the body. And I'll tell you, your first thought is like, it would be just like, sending little ping pong balls against this table and they just bounce off because the table's solid, right? It's not going to go through it. Our body is solid, so particles are going to hit it. They're not going to. Well, these particles are so small they slide into spaces that are inside our body, so that these protons can go deep into our body, but they do get slowed down because they're interacting with the tissues of our body. And then when they finally slow down at the end of their path, they give off a burst of energy. And that inner crux is the huge advantage we get with proton therapy. And I'll explain that a little bit more. This is a mathematical or graphical representation of how that energy is absorbed. Let's start with conventional radiation, or IMRT. When you aim a beam of radiation coming from this direction, so if you bear with me here, if the beam's coming in like this, and this is the surface of the body, and then this is how deep within the body we are, the amount of radiation energy that is deposited or put into the body at that point can be measured and graphed on a scale here. This is the maximum dose that's delivered. Then as it enters the body, right at very first it's not delivering the most, but just literally within this far within the body, that's the maximum dose delivery point when you're using X-rays, which is great if you're treating a tumor that's this deep. Well, it's not as great as you might think, but because then you continue to give radiation energy as it passes through the body. And a regular radiation beam will pass literally all the way through the body and exit out the other side. You've not given up all of the energy of that beam. You've given up most of it, 70% of it perhaps. But notice that by the time you get to the area where the tumor is, you're only giving off half as much energy as you gave off close to the surface of the body. Which means that we're not focusing the energy on the tumor, we're focusing the energy this far underneath your skin. That's not a good way of doing it. Well, we don't actually do it that way. In order to make that work, we may aim a beam, if you think of prostate cancer, from a lot of different angles, so that the distribution of radiation energy is into a lot of different areas. But then it always focuses on the prostate because it's always at that one point. Think about, spotlights in a theater. The one diva on stage. How do you make the diva light up on stage, but not the backgrounds, not the backup singers? And you bring several spotlights focused on her from those different angles. Not just one that goes at her and may illuminate a lot of the stage behind her as well. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we do with three-dimensional and IMRT photon radiation. But it still gives a lot of radiation to other tissues. It still gives radiation on the way out, beyond. There's nothing to treat out here. There's no cancer cells over here. So if this is the tumor, this proton therapy distribution is a better way of getting the job done. You want to aim the protons at the tumor, and then we can make protons go a certain depth and then stop. And this is the key point about protons, or any other what we call charged particle radiation energy, is they'll go a certain depth and then stop. So here's the beauty of it. We're giving a big dose of radiation, at least to this point in the tumor. We can spread this out a little bit too. But that's where the maximum dose is. Here, it's not giving off nearly as much dose. Now there is some dose on the way in, so we do expose some other tissues to radiation. But the even bigger news is this radiation dose out here goes to zero very quickly. Zero radiation dose over here if we're using proton therapy. So whatever's on the other side of my target, with its portion of the brain, or a piece of the colon, or a liver, or a kidney, or a spinal cord, or a lot of things that I won't maybe want to give much radiation to, I can aim the beam right at it, at a tumor in front of it, and it stops and it doesn't go into that critical structure. So this is a huge advantage. And we've known about this for 75 years or something like that. I mean, the first idea of this was actually written in a paper in 1946, right after World War II. So it goes back that far, right? But it's taken years and years of engineering to develop this to the point where we can actually reasonably do this and treat a series of patients efficiently, consistently, and reliably, reproducibly, so we know what we're doing every time we're doing it. Now, the machinery to make this happen is immense. Regular radiation treatment equipment, if you had the front of this room, I could install basically a regular radiation machine. Now, they're still big machines, cost a lot of money, several $1 million, weighs 2 tons, big gantry machine that accelerates electrons and makes x-rays. And these are incredibly well-developed and engineered machines, and now there are thousands and thousands of them all through the country. I don't know what the exact number of those machines is in this country, but just here in the Nashville area alone, there's 3 dozen of those machines, at least 2 dozen. So a lot of different machines that can do that. I can install that in this space right here. Now, to make protons do this, you have to make protons go very, very fast. You have to accelerate protons. And accelerating protons is no small task. Regular radiation treatment machines that do what I described earlier as regular external beam radiation, X-ray therapy, IMRT, three-dimensional conformal radiation, all of those descriptors, we actually accelerate electrons. Now I know that nuclear physics may not be your hobby, but when you look at an electron versus a proton, the proton is what's in the nucleus of an atom, and the electron circles around it like a planet orbiting the sun, sort of, although they tend to go all over the place. And so the difference, however, is amazing. Just like the sun is hugely massive compared to one of the planets, it's kind of the same deal in an atom. The proton weighs almost 2,000 times what the electron weighs. 1,854, I think, is the difference. So, and I tell people it's sort of like the difference between if an electron was a ping pong ball, and we normally have to accelerate these ping pong balls and make them do our bidding for us with regular radiation treatment. A proton, by comparison, is a bowling ball. So I don't have them with me here today, but if you'll put it in your mind, think about a ping pong ball on one palm and a bowling ball on the other. And think about the difference. And think about, okay, this ping pong ball, you can make it accelerate and bounce it off the wall or make it turn, and pretty easy, right? Try to do the same thing to a bowling ball. Put it on the table, see how easy it is to blow it across the table, or to make it stop suddenly, or to make it turn. And so we accelerate bowling balls by comparison to the other type of radiation accelerating ping pong balls. And that helps you understand why the equipment that we use is so massive and expensive. This is actually a schematic of the actual beamline that's in the back of this building. Our protons get accelerated in this device right here, which is called a cyclotron. And a cyclotron uses a combination of very powerful electromagnets, a pair of them, and then very powerful electric fields to both apply a voltage difference to a proton to make it, you know, if protons facing a voltage difference, anything that's positively charged wants to go toward the negative side, right? I know I've got an engineering background, but that's a pretty basic concept. And if you do that enough times, whatever you're making go to the negative side, it gets going pretty fast because it's being accelerated the whole time. Well, what we do with the cyclotron, we do it in a circular fashion. And we actually have the protons going around and around and around and around and around and around like that. Actually, a proton hits in the middle of this, and by the time it's going down this pathway here, it's usually gone in about, I think the number is between 800 and 1,000 circles. And the reason it goes in a circle is because these huge electromagnets keep an electromagnetic field there, and one of the principles of physics is that when a or any charged particle moves through a magnetic field, it curves. So we can make it curve, like you throw a frisbee and make it curve in the right kind of an angle, and we can control that every time. Now, by the time they get the outside of this spinning like this, and they head down this back pipeline here, which is what we call our main beam line, they're going about 60% of the speed of light. Now I know the speed of light, everybody has a pretty good concept, that's pretty fast. 186,000 miles per second is the most common descriptor. We're at a description, we're at about 60% of that or a little bit more with the main beam light coming out. And so put in terms of miles per hour, they're going about 400 million miles per hour. And at that speed, actually, I think if they were allowed to go on a racetrack around the Earth, they could actually circle the circumference of the Earth about, I think, something like 5 times in a second. It's, you know, fast, right? So the reason we want them to go that fast is because that allows them to come into a piece of tissue that is a patient and allows it to penetrate fairly deep before it stops. If you don't accelerate it that fast, it'll just go and then stop. And it won't go very far. We can't treat a deep-seated tumor. So we've learned how fast we have to make them go. Now, as they go down this back pipeline here, they're being held in check. They're going in the inside of a tube, basically a metal tube about this big around. And it goes the entire length of the back of our building. Inside there is where our proton beam is. But if you don't do something to it, it'll tend to splay apart. You know, the positives push each other away, and the beam will just naturally diffract itself. Now, we've pulled a vacuum into that tube, so we get all the air molecules out of there, okay? All the nitrogen and the oxygen and water vapor. Pull it out so it's not going to bump into anything. It's going down just a vacuum like in outer space. And if it's headed down that pipeline like that, we can choose to pull it off at any point and bring it into these treatment rooms. And these treatment rooms, this is the only one we have active right now. We bend the beam 90 degrees, and you can do that with large magnets. That's a big bending magnet. This is a bending magnet. That's a triggering magnet, sort of like the switch for a railroad train that's in the yard, and you throw the switch and the train's going to follow a different track. And we do that by turning this magnet on. And then it comes to here, we turn it a little bit more, and then it gets straightened out a little bit. And then it comes here and it gets turned a little bit more. Now it's going this way. 90 degrees different. Now we have it in a position that we can actually bring it to bear on a patient and put the patient in the exact right position and bring the beam to bear so that we can actually create the energy hitting that patient where we want it to hit them. Now these rooms are a little bit more complex. That's great if you want to bring the beam in from the side. If you want to bring the beam in from different angles, now you have to bend the beam even more. And this becomes a trick. And I was told last night that this works, but if you consider my arm straight out of the wall is how the beam comes out of the wall. Then what we have to do to make it, and that's great, if the beam comes out like this and then you put the patient here. So beam coming out like this, patient right here, perfect. As long as you're just trying to get at them from the side. Because no matter how well you think you can sleep at night on their side, or curl up, or get in a position, you can't really set a patient up reliably other than flat on their back or sometimes on their stomach. And anything else doesn't work well, so you can bring the beams in from the side. This is great for treating 98% of our prostate cancer patients. Because the beam coming in this way or this way allows us to actually hit the prostate with little damage to other tissues like the rectum or the bladder. So that's great. But if we're trying to treat, for example, breast cancer, and when I use protons to treat breast cancer, I want to bring the beam straight down at the breast and then calculate it to where it doesn't go any deeper to the lung of the heart. But I have to bring the beam from an angle above her. She's laying on the table like this, and the beam can't come from the side. It needs to come from above her. To rotate that beam back to this, my arm, we have to bend it out about 60 degrees at my elbow. And then at my wrist, it has to bend back 150 degrees. Now you've got this kind of geometric arrangement, and the beam at the end of all of this is going, bloop. And so I can put a patient here and bring the beam from any angle I want. That sounds like it's a better idea, right? Problem is this. This equipment, in order to bend those, remember, bowling balls? These magnets are very, very powerful. As a matter of fact, the only way we can make a powerful magnet in this space, in this setting, is to use what we call superconducting technology. We have to supercool these magnets down to about negative 270 degrees centigrade. That's about 4 degrees above Kelvin. In other words, inside of these magnets are colder than low Earth orbit, if you think about how cold outer space is. That's not really outer space. That's outside the International Space Station. It's warmer, I think, outside the International Space Station than it is inside that magnet. But the reason you do that is electricity flows very, very efficiently with little heat generation and with little arcing and other problems we get, so we can create a very powerful magnet in a very small space. So this is a superconducting magnet called an acromat magnet. It defines about how it curves the beam. So if the beam comes in here, it's curved this way. This is showing that it would be on its side, okay, on this schematic. You're looking at it where the beam wouldn't be up like this, but on its side, it comes in. My arm didn't curl that well. And it comes in this way, okay? So that's what you're looking at in the schematic. Beam comes in, goes to the right, 60 degrees, and then gets bent back around 150 degrees, and the patient will be here, and the beam's coming at them like this. Actually, the patient will be right here. And the beam comes out like that. Does that make sense? So the problem with all of this stuff is it's an engineering tour de force to make all of this stuff. This entire gantry, in other words, this what I'm talking about right here, this all the way around, you have to have a 3-story building basically. It's 30 feet in diameter, or about 28 feet in diameter. And this is the most compact version that has yet been designed and built. Because some of the other ones, like the ones that are installed in Knoxville, the ones that are installed in the majority of the proton centers in the world, those gantries are 110 to 150 ton pieces of equipment. Now ours come in at a nice felt lightweight of about 40 to 50 tons, which is better. It's a lot better. Also, this room is a lot smaller. This entire room you're seeing here is a lot smaller than the rooms we have to use for those others. Those other ones have to go all the way back to the back of the building. And you have to make a bigger building, you have to put in more concrete. So a little bit of a plug for what the Pronova, which is the name of this particular equipment, which is being built, by the way, here in Tennessee. How many people are from Tennessee here? Okay, I'm a Tennessee native. So the fact that we're actually the first commercial installation in the world of this equipment that was not only conceived and designed and engineered and prototyped and now being manufactured in Tennessee. Comes from, this equipment is manufactured in Maryville, Tennessee, or Merle, if you're from Maryville. I grew up in East Tennessee. And the magnets here, this superconducting technology comes from Oak Ridge National Laboratories. You know where I grew up and where I was born and raised, went to high school, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So it's a really cool thing for me. I did some college research projects associated with Oak Ridge National Laboratories, so it's really kind of a coming home for me in many ways. It's really a neat thing. Now, I guess you don't care if you're from California, I guess, but to me, this is cool. Most of the proton equipment out there actually comes from Belgium, Germany, or Japan. There's a few others out there, but the majority of the proton equipment is being manufactured overseas. So this is one of the first major full gantry systems being manufactured here in the United States. Tennessee, United States. So, all right, again, a schematic to show how the radiation dose with regular X-ray therapy would treat a tumor like this. It comes in from the front. There's more energy up here at the front portion of the chest, like at the sternum. Some at the tumor, but you're still giving radiation all the way out and back through the spinal cord and other tissues. Well, we don't ever typically accept this, so we bring the beam from a lot of different angles to spread this intense dose and this exit dose out over more tissues, yet concentrating it right there. So we've learned how to make that work. But with proton therapy, it comes in and it gives its maximal delivery of dose here, not here, and none here. So it's just a better way of doing it. So proton therapy specifically, again, you saw earlier, 1954, Berkeley Laboratory out in California, in the Bay Area. First patient was treated. Harvard University then came along in '61. The first real commercially, or I should say clinically oriented facility. These were research labs that they just actually brought the patient into the research lab and kind of set them up and used the output of the proton beam and put them in the right spot. But these things weren't built to treat people. They just were built for research purposes. Then this one was built to treat people, 1990. And it took about another 10 or 12 years before then Harvard also then built one specifically to treat people. Up to this point, they were using the Cambridge cyclotron. Many hundreds of thousands, well, many thousands, but well over 100,000 patients have been treated with proton therapy. So it's not a rare thing, but it's still not widely available even today. It was FDA approved in 1988. So I hear it all the time. They say, well, you know, that's kind of an experimental therapy, isn't it, Dr. Gray? I said, well, you better get on the phone and call the FDA. Because in 1988, they decided it was approved. That means it's not experimental. Now, is it investigational in certain settings? Yes, that is reasonable terminology to say, should we use proton therapy for a woman with breast cancer, a patient with a throat cancer, a man with prostate cancer, whatever it might be? Is that as good, the same as, better than regular radiation therapy? Well, most of the data will tell us that proton therapy will be better in a lot of these situations. The reason it hasn't been immediately jumped on is because, remember that last slide? Or this one?
Oh, yeah.
This is not cheap. This facility is a $100 million installation. You can build a small hospital for that kind of money. That cyclotron alone, I forgot what the exact cost, but $6 to $10 million. Now, it's a big old piece of equipment. It weighs as much as a 747 airliner. It's a very highly controlled, all of these magnets cost money, all of these gantries are expensive. The equipment to do this is far more expensive than, than regular equipment. I'm working today. So.
You may have to run downstairs.
I hope not to. But, so that's the reason it hasn't come into widespread use, because it costs so much more. Honestly, if proton therapy were no more difficult or expensive than regular radiation therapy, I personally feel that we would have probably become a dominant proton radiation delivery community across the world, because it's just a better way of putting the energy where you want it and keeping the energy from where you don't want it. But because of the expense, and the expense, you could say that it's anywhere from 4 times as expensive to maybe 10 times or more expensive as doing regular radiation in terms of setting up a facility, and the actual treatments are also more expensive. So it is more expensive. And so the question becomes, is it worth it? So that's really the question that we're dealing with now. If I come across a radiation doctor who says, well, proton therapy really can't do anything that regular radiation can't already do, and I go, really, you need to go back through your board certification exams, because you need to understand the physics of this. You need to know, you've been working your entire career to try to do a better job at putting tumor dose here and no dose elsewhere, and then you can see what proton therapy is going to do, and you're just going to turn a blind eye to that because you don't have access to it? Well, no, you have to be a scientist, and you have to say, and I came through this whole realization myself over the last many years, because when I trained many years ago, there was very little proton access. So we weren't, we understood what it was about, because it goes back before I was trained. Thank you very much, I'm not that old. But in the 1980s when I trained, that was before Loma Linda was open, for example. I was done with training here. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information about how well it worked in common everyday usage. But in today's world, it's really kind of hard to stick your head in the sand and go, that's not really any better, and it's more expensive, so let's not do it. And to that I say, that's not a very smart idea. Major cancer centers are coming to the same realization. If you look at all of the different major cancer centers that are in the country, this is based upon U.S. News and World Report, if that is truly to be believed, but these are major cancer centers, there's no doubt about it. And most of them are either building or developing or have already put in place proton systems. So if they think it's worthwhile, probably the rest of us should probably fall in suit. Of course, other people would say, yeah, but MD Anderson and Sloan Kettering, they have gazillions of dollars to spend on this kind of stuff, so they can afford to do it. Well, you can make it affordable, and that's part of what this company is doing. So what are the benefits? Mainly it's this: less healthy tissue around the tumor is exposed to radiation. Again, very schematically, hit the tumor, don't hit other tissues. Regular radiation tends to put more radiation to those other tissues. That's not what you want. So a few examples of what we treat in today's world. Prostate cancer, for example, it is the second most common cancer after skin cancer. It hits about 1 out of 7 men. It's actually probably a little higher than that, to be honest with you. I'm not sure which statistic that came from, but we think actually it's more common than that, but it's not diagnosed that often. And here's just a display of how the radiation energy gets distributed. This is proton, this is regular X-ray. This is a good IMRT plan. You're focusing a lot of the energy right here. That's important. You're trying to keep it away from the rectum. That's important. And you don't see it here, but you're trying to keep it off the bladder, parts of the small intestine or colon, okay? Because they don't have cancer in them. And with regular X-ray, you're having to bring the beam. This is a beam coming this way. This is a beam coming this way. This is a beam this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. Okay, that's how regular IMRT is designed. This is proton therapy. One beam from this side, one beam from this side. Now there is energy here and energy here, similar to what you're seeing in that blue shaded area. You get the same tight distribution here. But you look at the rectum, a large component of the rectum now gets 0 radiation dose with a proton beam compared to what it has to be here. And the same thing applies to the bladder and other structures nearby. We can quantify this. We use things like a dose volume histogram, which is our way of mathematically saying how much radiation goes to this structure that we're trying to hit and how much radiation goes to the structures we're not trying to hit. That's one of our ways of doing a quick analysis of it. And every time we look at that, we find that this system works better than this system. Now, how important is it? Is that much radiation to the rectum acceptable? Well, to be honest with you, most of the time it is. But there may be 10 or 20% of guys who that much radiation to the rectum will create a long lifetime irritation with their bowel habits. They can have some occasional diarrhea, or they can have some irritability with their bowels. And if you almost completely eliminate the radiation. Now, you still treat some of the rectum here. You can't avoid that because it comes up right next to the prostate. But it's what we call a volumetric effect. If you're decreasing the amount of radiation to a large portion of the organ, we've shown through dozens of different studies and years of research that that's a better thing to do. Proton therapy has been shown to give us better likelihoods of good outcomes, but we haven't demonstrated this in a way that's enough to convince the insurance companies. Because they want more data. And I understand. They're saying it's more expensive, so prove to us it's worth it. And that's not an unreasonable thing for them to ask, but I think they're being a little draconian about it, personally. But this was a group of investigators that looked at a group of patients in a large national database run by Medicare in our government to look at how well patients had, how well they were able to survive 5 years without any problems with their cancer. It actually showed superiority in patients that had proton therapy versus IMRT, and this was statistically significant. But again, this is not in a tightly controlled trial. People would say, well, the proton patients were just better patients. They were smarter men who had the wherewithal to go to a proton center, and so those arguments are brought up. That's why they did better. And that may be true, but it's hard to explain it when you look at a group of patients where we did what we call a matched control group, which actually made the IMRT group a little bit better. You took out the guys who maybe never could have gotten to a proton center, and there's still a difference. This graphically shows the curves of survivability of the more commonly used IMRT and proton therapy. So there are hints that we really are going to have patients living longer and living better. It's really more about living better when it's most of the cancers we're treating. Because proton therapy can improve our cure rate, but it's probably more dominantly going to give us the same good cure rates we're already getting with radiation, but with fewer side effects during treatment and complications after treatment. The quality of life. A little bit more, this is an interesting point that a lot of people don't think about, and it's my job to remind patients of. Actually exposing the patient to radiation energy to treat their cancer can actually create a cancer in their body. It's a little bit of an ugly double-edged sword. So the likelihood of developing a secondary malignancy is actually significantly greater in the IMRT group than it is in the proton group. Why? Because you're spraying that much radiation energy, you're exposing that many more tissues, it's much more tissue at risk for developing another malignancy. So it's one of the arguments, but that may only make a difference of 1 or 2% when it really gets down to it. Because this scale here, notice that this is not like 0 to 100. If you don't look at this axis here, you realize, okay, that looks really bad. Well, no, not as bad as you might think. All right, so another way of looking at some studies from the University of Florida, and then very well conducted studies at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I know how well this is done. This is where I trained, and the guy that generated a lot of this data is one of my fellow colleagues from when we trained together. So I have personal knowledge of knowing that this is very well done by very good scientists. And this is actually pretty good results in this uglier group of cancers, but the published results of proton therapy do seem to be a bit better. Now that may be chance, or there may be selection of patients, that's what we don't know yet. So we'll figure out with more data. Again, I told you about the volume of the rectum exposed, and this is a way of trying to predict that based upon how much of the rectum was exposed to radiation, and we found that the proton patients had a lower incidence of issues with bowel urgency, bowel frequency compared to IMRT. Now notice that this means, for example, bowel frequency. They have to go to the bathroom more often. 90% of patients didn't have it, right? 10% did. But wouldn't you rather have it that 96% of patients don't have that? So you have to keep that in mind. It's not that, oh, if you don't have proton therapy, you're going to have terrible results with regular radiation. No, far from it. It's just proton therapy is another better way of doing it, and that's what we're always trying to develop. We're trying to develop a better way of doing these things. Let's look at breast cancer real quick. Again, a common malignancy. Here's the dose distribution pattern for this particular situation. Here it is with protons, because the beam comes down this way and stops right along here, because we can tell it where to stop. We can tell it to stop different here than over here, because there's different thicknesses here. We can do this. I won't go into all the pencil beam technology that we use to do that, but rest assured we can do this. We have computers that help us. If I hand calculated this, we could treat maybe one patient every 6 months or something like that. I mean, it would be a lot of work, but we have computers that do all that hard work for us. We just have to tell it how to do the calculations. If you use regular x-rays, you use a beam this way and another beam this way. and it tends to spray a little bit of radiation back here. Now that thing right there, that's the heart. And when I trained, I was really taught that the dose to the heart is not that important. These women aren't keeling over dead from a heart attack or anything like that as a result of, they're not having congestive heart failure, they're not having angina pains. Well, wait a second, when you watch them over a long, long time, we realize that with regular radiation, giving this amount of dose to the heart, and this is the excess that was given by doing this instead of this. Here's a large research paper, just came out a few years ago, published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So this is the biggest, widest published medical journal in the world. And a study done in Europe looked at for every extra dose of radiation that was given to the heart, we saw increasing incident of cardiac events. And when I say cardiac event, it can be a heart attack. It can be, well, the woman just had angina pains and she had to go have a stent placed, or but they had something happen to their heart that they wouldn't have if they had had treatment otherwise. So the excess amount went up in a linear fashion with every additional radiation dose you gave. So the more radiation dose you gave, the more it happened. In this group, this study, for example, which gave a pretty high dose to the heart, unfortunately, those women had 100% extra. That doesn't mean it's a guarantee she had a cardiac event. It means she had, essentially, that translates, she had twice as many as the group of patients who didn't receive radiation. Does that follow? So, 10% of your women were going to have a problem, then now it's 20%. It's doubled. So, and if it's a lower dose, it's great, but really, you want to give as low a dose to the heart as possible based upon this data. And this is kind of the new science on this, and all of a sudden, we're very anxious about the amount of radiation we give to a woman's heart when we're treating her breast cancer. And it's worse on the left side than on the right side. For example, a study looked at the actual survival free from coronary artery disease. In other words, the woman has breast cancer treatment. And mysteriously, if she has radiation treatment, if it was treatment to the right side, 90% of those women never had a cardiac event. But if it was treatment on the left side, only 75% did. Why the difference? Well, the difference is when you look at the anatomy, the heart is mostly midline, but it's more on the left than it is on the right. If you're treating the left side, you're going to give more dose to the heart. And we've gone back and figured this out. We calculated the doses. So left-sided breast cancer is more of a challenge for us than right-sided breast cancer. Otherwise, it's even Steven. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's no higher morbidity, mortality either way. You got lung behind, you have spinal cord in there, you have all these other structures we have to pay attention to. Arm edema can happen, all these little complications, but most of it doesn't happen. Heart disease doesn't typically happen, but if it's on the left side, it's far more common than on the right side. In other words, this is more proof that we had to be concerned about this. And just a couple of other things real quickly. Head and neck cancer, tumors of the tongue, tumor of the tonsil area, tumor of the voice box, tumor of the back of your nose called the nasopharynx. These tumors afflict a lot of people, and they're very difficult to treat surgically. Some of them are not terribly difficult to treat with surgery, but they can be disabling, because if you try to surgically remove a tumor from the voice box, you might have to remove the voice box, and you really don't have a voice anymore. And so we have learned to use radiation treatment very commonly with chemotherapy to treat a lot of head and neck cancers. Well, given this radiation to this area, if you look through a cross-section through here like this, when we're using regular radiation, we oftentimes have to spread the radiation around quite a bit more. When we're using proton therapy, we can often pick a couple of entry points, hit the area we want, and really save a lot of area here. For example, the excess radiation here is pretty dramatic because the beams of radiation had to come from so many different angles with x-rays. We gave a lot more radiation to tissues that did not need it, wasn't going to help us, compared with proton therapy. And we've now found that patients who get proton therapy, they actually have a reduction in like the necessity for a feeding tube. In other words, like a tube that has to go through their nose or actually straight into their stomach to allow them to get adequate nutrition. Why would you do that? Because their throat can get so irritated during treatment that they can't swallow enough food to maybe be healthy and have good nutrition. And this is actually demonstrated from MD Anderson data already. And if you think about the cost of it, well, the cost of doing all these other things, if this IMRT treatment, it's cheaper at first because proton therapy here is more expensive. But over time, you had to do things, you had to do extra planning because the patient wasn't doing well, and they were losing weight, you had to replan it because their contours changed, you had to maybe give them a feeding tube, and at the end of the day, sometimes your overall cost of doing the treatment really is not that different. And so we're trying to make insurance companies aware of this too. It's not how much money you pay on the front end always, but it's the money that you pay throughout the course of a patient's care that can affect how much money you're going to have to pay to take care of this patient. And this doesn't take into account the fact that if you've not had to have these things done, like a feeding tube, and you've had a lot of dramatic weight loss, which makes you fatigued, then you feel better. You're able to function better. Quality of life. We're not trying to put a price tag on that, believe it or not, here. That has a huge price tag in my book. Lung cancer is an area we're just beginning to develop more in proton therapy, but it's very important because you're treating a tumor that's surrounded by structures that don't like radiation. The lungs, the esophagus, the spinal cord, and the heart. And so it's very difficult for us to do that planning. We use very sophisticated radiation planning to do it. Proton therapy gives us an advantage. Look how we're having to spray radiation to a lot of areas to treat this tumor in the chest. The heart's getting dosed, all this lung tissue is getting dosed, even dose of radiation spread to a low level on the heart, on the lung on the opposite side. If you use a proton beam from here and here, this gets nothing. This gets almost nothing. Even the remainder of the side of the heart, the lung on the same side, doesn't get as much radiation. This is actually an area of probably a lot of advancement we're going to see in proton therapy, but it hasn't been pushed as much. But I actually see this as a huge developing area. Locally advanced non-small cell lung cancer. One trial actually tried to look at this and compare protons against X-rays, done at MD Anderson, and actually did not show that proton therapy was any better. But when you looked at the devil's in the details oftentimes, in a research study, we found out that the patients who were getting proton therapy weren't using the latest technology that we now have available, number one. And number two, that they were actually being treated to different average doses, because when you did the X-rays, you kind of decreased the dose, and we found out more recently that maybe we don't have to use this dose in a lot of patients, but we were, because we could get away with it in proton therapy. And so we found out a lot of reasons that this probably wasn't the right way to conduct this trial. And so more recent information is showing that we're probably able to treat lung cancer more effectively and safer with the use of proton therapy, particularly with modern treatment techniques, than we were in the past. And there's other indications as well. One that I didn't talk about here is treating children's cancers. If you're treating a child with a cancer, thank goodness, it doesn't happen that often. The number of children with cancer in this entire nation in any given year is fewer than the number of breast cancer cases just in Tennessee. Just breast cancer in Tennessee. So children's cancers are not that common, but when they happen, they are devastating. And when you're using radiation, which is a tool for a lot of children's cancers, you want to be that much more worried about dose to other structures, because not only are these other tissues around the tumor healthy tissues, they're growing tissues, is the best way in my mind to look at it. And growing tissues are even more sensitive to the effects of radiation, so we have to be that much more critical of any radiation treatment technique which gives dose to normal structures. So in children's cancers, the majority of children's cancers, we already have little debate now in our scientific community that they ought to be treated with protons. But it's still only a fraction of children who are treated with protons, because there are just not enough of these facilities out there. But let me stop there, see if there's any questions I can answer. Yes, ma'am.
Generally, what do you see? Does insurance not cover it at all, or cover a part of it?
Hit and miss. The more common answer from the insurance company is no, and you know what, no. And then we have to go back and we have to appeal that decision. The patients can get very involved with that process. There are certain indications, very few small indications. Pediatric cancers, for example, most insurance companies won't say no about, regardless of the type of insurance they're under. There's a few of the rare tumors that have shown some definite benefits with proton therapy. We've done that. But for example, prostate treatment, breast cancer treatment, lung cancer treatment, throat cancer treatment, tumors of the brain that, not necessarily the really ugly, nasty, 1-year survival kind of brain tumors that we see, but tumors that don't grow as quickly, where you're really concerned about how much the rest of the brain gets impacted by radiation. Most of those things, the insurance companies are first blush, they say no. And so we're actively campaigning against that, trying to say, look, we're trying to educate the insurance companies. Now, they are educated, but the point is they know it's more expensive. And one of the dirty little truths is you may even make the argument about, well, the long-term care of this patient is not that much more expensive because we avoid more complications, so that translates back to a lowering of cost. And then they say, yeah, but by the time we're paying for that stuff, our company's not paying for that, Medicare is. And so they're making a very hardcore, rational business decision about this. It's just business from their point of view. And I know that they're trying to take care of patients, but it's a different mindset from what a physician or a clinician, you know, somebody in this facility trying to deliver care to the patient takes of you. But I mean, it's not an evil thing what the insurance companies are doing. I don't mean to say that. I just think they're being too profit-oriented right now on this. This is not, you know, if you converted a lot of the patients over to proton therapy, it's not going to crash the medical system at all. The bigger problem we have is we start converting all those, we simply don't have the facility. This facility could run 24 hours a day, can't come close to meeting the need just in Nashville. Now, we will build other facilities. They will come online. This was the 29th facility in the country. We now are at 31. There's about 84, I think the count is, in the entire world, which is not that many.
So Provision Care is the one who's building the facilities?
Well, one of the companies it is. So Provision, as a company, has a facility under construction in Orlando as we speak, okay? That won't be open for almost 2 years. And so I think, you know, late 20 or mid-late 2020 at the best. This equipment is probably going to be installed by Duke University, although we're trying to figure out who is going to use this particular equipment. In general, more and more academic medical centers are wanting access to proton therapy without having to go and get it from somebody nearby. They want their own. And it's important that everybody understands this is still an expensive technology. So we still have to be smart about how we use it. But like a lot of other technologies that came along, and we said they were too expensive. We said, you know, fuel injector was too expensive to put on a car compared to a carburetor. Go out in the parking lot and find me a carburetor. It's more expensive, but it's better. You know, a turbine engine is better than a reciprocating cylinder engine with a propeller on an airplane, right? When was the last time you got on an airplane? Not with a propeller, you may have one of those, but it was driven by a turbine engine. Because that's a newer engineered, better technology way of actually generating that kind of power for an aircraft. That's just the way it goes, but it's more expensive.
Is the number of treatments, like I had radiation for breast cancer and spine, and I went for the breast cancer every day for 6 weeks.
Right.
Do you do the same amount? Does it take that long when you do the proton therapy also?
Typically the fractionation schedule, what you're referring to, how much dose do you give each day, and then how do you break it up in a lot, the study of radiobiology teaches us that usually it's better to kind of peck at it over time instead of trying to hit it one time and kill the tumor. You're trying to peck at it in a little way that kills the cancer but doesn't damage the healthy tissues. And that number of treatments is actually declining. It used to be commonly 6 weeks, now it's actually more commonly 4 weeks in breast cancer. It used to be 8 weeks in prostate, now it's more commonly 6 weeks or even 4 weeks in prostate cancer. We're learning with newer data that we can shorten the course of treatment, and proton therapy tends to actually help that in a way because you're not delivering as much radiation to other tissues to begin with. But generally proton therapy is following the same fractionation schedules as the regular world of radiation therapy. And part of that is because most of the data for when you can shorten the number of treatments, the scientific accumulation, the accumulation of the clinical data that allows us to scientifically decide we're doing this just as safe, we're killing the tumors well, and we're not harming the adjacent tissues. That's being done in the X-ray world with regular radiation, which is still 98 or 99% of all radiation therapy. And proton therapy is following that lead because it's still the same kind of damage at the tumor in your body.
Well, okay, can you kind of give me an estimate of course, I don't know how much it was. So if insurance companies aren't paying, people are paying. What kind of cost would that be?
If you came and were to pay out of pocket for a course of treatment for prostate cancer or breast cancer, you could have to pay as much as $50,000, $70,000 for an entire course of treatment. It is not inexpensive. Now, regular radiation therapy, if you were forced to pay out of pocket for that as well, you would be facing an expense that could easily be $30,000 or $40,000 right there, you see. So the differential is anywhere from maybe 30 or 40% more expensive to do protons. Sometimes it's double the cost to do protons. It depends upon the scenario and the situation and the center and part of the country and a lot of other things. Please?
Are you treating all those disease types here now? Or?
Okay, so here at Provision, we only have that fixed beam room. That was over here, remember?
Yeah.
The two gantries are still not operating yet. They're going through final testing. Our first gantry will be available, we believe, right now in April. So by the summer, or late summer, we'll have both of those gantries up, and we'll be able to treat most any kind of diagnosis here. Not everything, maybe, that any other center might be able to do, but we'll be pretty widespread in our ability. We'll be treating breast cancer, we'll be treating throat cancers, brain tumors, we'll be treating tumors in the chest or the belly, a lot of different things.
By summer.
Right, right, by summer. Right now, I'm limited to prostate cancer because it's the only way with my fixed beam. That's the only, there would be some other tumor types in the pelvis I might be able to treat, but I've got actually more prostate cancer patients now than we can even get on the machine right now, which will get better as we have more capacity, more machines available. So that's
And
kind
if
of.
you've had regular radiation, can you also have proton?
You mean to have it again a second time? So re-irradiation is actually one of the areas we actually use proton therapy a lot for.
Okay.
And that's what we do to minimize dose to other structures. It's not easy to give radiation a second time around because you have an accumulation of radiation from both the first and the second course, and that can become more dangerous.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the Medicare. You said that Medicare covers. I went in and said, I'm getting this, they're going to cover the treatment, or they're going to have guidelines, oh, you're 85 years old, we'll cut you off at 85. I mean, does any of that apply?
The age cutoff, I'm not experienced, other than you have to be of a certain age to have Medicare, of course. But the Medicare will be more gracious in certain tumor areas than they will in others. And it's hard to explain, sometimes they'll be more forgiving about being able to cover a certain disease site than others. And sometimes it takes some convincing, and depends upon how the Medicare carrier for that region. And so in our area, it's been reasonably generous about it, but that won't always hold and always be the case.
Go ahead, Gilda.
How is it determined if you qualify for proton treatment?
Well, the only way you really know is you've got to see somebody like me. You have to see a radiation oncologist that does proton therapy. Because if you talk to a radiation oncologist who doesn't work with proton therapy, like I was just a few years ago, I knew about it, but I didn't have access to it, and I didn't really understand it as well as I've been spending the last few years re-educating myself in that regard. But you'd have to see somebody like me at a proton center. And you'd have to say to your doctor, your surgeon, your medical oncologist, your radiation oncologist, I'd like to be evaluated for proton therapy. And they may reasonably tell you, look, your situation doesn't really lend itself well to proton therapy. And I think most of them can be pretty honest and knowledgeable about that. Ultimately, you almost have to see somebody like me. But oftentimes that is a situation of one of my colleagues, and I'm in a large group called Tennessee Oncology, and I have lots of partners, and they may call me up and they say, hey Jim, we have a patient with, and I say, listen, that's not really, that's a case that would be easily as well treated with X-ray therapy, which is much more widely available than having to come here for proton therapy. But they may tell me about a case and I say, that's where I can give that patient a little bit of an edge, maybe a big edge, by using this proton equipment to treat them. We're still learning that. As we have more machines, we'll be able to learn that better.
So you had mentioned that generally the insurance is more agreeable with children, and then maybe not so much when they get into Medicare. So what is a range that, like, is it like, let's say, like maybe before a certain age that it's more agreeable to the insurance? Is it like only children, or like is there like middle-aged people that they're more agreeable to?
No, I mean, it's more of a cutoff of children,
Just,
18 and under,
okay.
basically, compared to adults. And then the big cutoff then is being Medicare eligible. Typically it's 65. It can adjust a little bit, but it's age 65. You're Medicare eligible and you're on Medicare. And there's subtleties with sometimes having a Medicare replacement plan and some other issues that can change that. But that's why we have a full-time financial analysis staff here about doing that, and they actually go through that with every patient. Because you don't want to have a patient frustrated with it, And I'm careful also about making sure people understand. This is why it's important to understand regular X-ray therapy is still good. I haven't been doing some really secondhand terrible way of doing radiation most of my career. But is this a better tool for a lot of circumstances? Yeah, it is. And right now, proton therapy represents about 2% of all radiation probably done. Maybe not even that, 1%. And in the near future, I would like to see proton therapy applied more widely. It might be that as much as 70%, 80% of cancers are better treated with proton therapy if you really get right down to it. There's no way we're going to be able to handle that for the foreseeable future. We don't have enough pieces of equipment. Almost done. You ready? Okay. Just a few more questions. I've got to get to work.
Does proton therapy lend itself better if it's an isolated cancer rather than
Yes.
spread to various areas?
Yes. As a rule, when you're trying to restrict your radiation dose to a particular area, there are circumstances where we give radiation to a broader area. And in that circumstance, the advantage of proton therapy is kind of lost because you're having to treat a lot more tissue anyway. X-rays can still do that just about as well as protons can. There's even situations where we purposely expose the entire body to radiation in some forms of, usually a leukemia. And it's usually a form of a treatment of leukemia in association with trying to replace that patient's bone marrow, called a bone marrow transplant. And so the treatment with radiation to the entire body is actually designed to help prepare that patient, wipe out cancer cells, and change their own immune system. And that's called total body irradiation. Well, that doesn't make any sense to do proton therapy for that, because you're trying to give the entire body radiation, so you've kind of flipped your goals there, and that would never be done with proton therapy. It'll always be done with X-ray therapy. So yes, the broader the area we're treating, the less specific or less advantageous proton therapy is. And then interestingly, if you go all the way down to the other end of the spectrum, the extremely small tumors, the technology we have right now probably still favors some of the X-ray type devices we have that are designed to treat that, and proton therapy is not actually better when you're getting down to tumors really small. I mean, talking down to less than an inch in size or something, but it's a pretty small proportion of our tumors.
The other question I had, what makes the radiation dissipate much faster? You showed the regular radiation exits the other side of the body, and this one doesn't even...
Okay, we're going to schedule you a 2-hour lecture for this one.
That's a long question.
That is not a quick answer.
I thought maybe it's the speed or something.
Well, protons actually dissipate their energy at a different rate, but there's all kinds of different interactions of any type of electromagnetic radiation or charged particles with the human body. And there are people who get PhDs in just that. So not a 2-hour lecture, but about 4 years of postgraduate training.
I was going to say, that's probably a little over my head.
Well, no, it's not that it's over your head. It's just that I'm not capable of explaining it in a quick 2-liner about that. But there's different ways that energy is absorbed when it goes into the body. And the absorption of energy going through a tissue is not just limited to what we do. I mean, people worry about that with how you design your windshield to block out ultraviolet radiation and not visible light, right? That's relative different diffraction and absorption and opacity, or the ability to let some energy pass and other energy not. And so it's a huge area of research about how energy passes through materials. We're interested in not whether it passes all the way through, but how much energy it puts in there, because that energy is the damage to the DNA, which leads to a biologic event, which is one cancer cell, instead of becoming 2 cancer cells, becomes 0 cancer cells because it gets damaged. And of course, we're dealing typically with billions of cancer cells, and how many gazillions of normal cells in our body. So that's why we mathematically analyze this. I'm never worried about whether or not I'm killing this one cell. It's just, can I kill 100 million rather than 75 million, and then maybe, or 50 million, maybe that's the difference of whether or not I cure that patient or not. If that makes sense. But yeah, the absorption is something we get into, and that's more the world of physics. I mean, my job has to understand the physics, I have to understand the biology, but then I have to be a clinician. And that's the majority of my job as a physician. But a physicist focuses on the physical nature of that, the equipment, and then how the radiation impacts. The actual outcome, the biologic outcome, that is the field of radiobiology, which, believe it or not, there's lots of people with PhDs in nothing but radiobiology, and they study that. And so I'm glad they have, because they've taught us how to do it. What do we need to do? I bridge all of those sciences, which is the fun part for me. Also, I have an engineering background, so all of this stuff in the back hallway was really fascinating to me. I sometimes forget it's not always fascinating to everybody else, but I find it really cool.
Is this the only center in Tennessee?
I was going to say that again?
The only center in Tennessee?
There's actually 3 centers in Tennessee, believe it or not. We are the 3rd. The first one was at Knoxville, which is also a provision facility. The next one was at St. Jude's, so St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. They have proton equipment there, okay? Their proton equipment is dedicated to children, as it should be. Again, I told you that's one of the most clear indications for it. They're the only center in the entire world that is 100% dedicated to treating children. And bully for them. And I'm proud to have that in Tennessee as well. But if you have prostate cancer, you can't go to St. Jude's. If you have breast cancer, as a rule, you can't go to St. Jude's. So the vast majority of cancer is not in children, but you've got it. I'm glad we've got that. I'm glad we've got that, and I'm proud to have that as part of Tennessee too.
How did it come here? What,
To Nashville?
yes, Franklin, yeah.
Well, in Franklin was a selected place in Middle Tennessee. We wanted to have protons in Middle Tennessee. I say we, Provision as a company did. So the leadership of Provision and the owners of Provision, they built a center in Knoxville, started building this equipment also, and said, where's the next logical place for us to put another center? And Middle Tennessee was a glaring absence of having access to proton therapy. I've worked with several different groups over the last decade, seeing if we could get the right financial arrangements set up and investors and the company to come in and invest the time and energy to build a proton center. 3 or 4 different sets of meetings and so forth that I participated in because I've been interested in it for a long time. Never became an economic reality. When we first looked at it 10 years ago, we were talking about $250 million for a center here in Nashville somewhere. And everybody was saying, well, we can't afford to do that. We're never going to be able to keep the doors open. We can't make enough money to support it. We can't get enough charitable money to do it. And it was just too expensive. And now we're managing to rein in a lot of those expenses. If that makes sense. So this was the 3rd center in the state. We have 3 in Tennessee. We probably have as much proton availability per capita as any state in the country. I'd like to see that figure. That's going to be a great statistic to look at because we have 3, actually almost 4 treatment rooms in Knoxville, 3 here, 3 in Memphis. So we have what you could say 10 treatment rooms in a state of 7 million people. And Florida's got probably, I bet, 15 treatment rooms, but they've got 17 million people. I'd like to, that's a great statistic that just came to my thought. And we could look at that. Of course, they would also argue against anybody putting another proton center in Tennessee, but Denver doesn't have one. They right now have plans for one. How does that happen? I don't know. That won't stay that way, I guarantee you. But
Just an interesting question. What type of engineering background do you have?
biomedical engineering. Yeah, but I did it I went into engineering as the son of an engineer and said, I want to go to medical school, but what if I don't get into medical school? I want a real job.
Yeah, my daughter just graduated in bioengineering.
Yeah, so I did biomedical engineering at the University of Tennessee, and I don't regret it a bit. Yes, ma'am.
If someone has metastatic breast cancer where it's in several different places, is it not recommended to do proton therapy?
Proton therapy probably won't have the advantage in that circumstance that it would under other circumstances, okay, for a variety of reasons. But typically, once the cancer is moved to different locations, that's not always the case, but typically once it's moved to other locations, we're going to use systemic therapies, or when we use radiation therapy, it'll probably be a focused form of X-ray therapy or a different form of, a localized form of X-ray therapy. So the advantage of proton therapy, the argument for proton therapy gets a lot weaker. It doesn't go away though necessarily, particularly if it's the location that has been previously irradiated, you need to treat it again. Sometimes that is, there the argument resurfaces to use proton therapy. But as a general answer, no. Any other questions? And then I will apologize that I've got to take off and actually take care of somebody downstairs. Thank you very much.